Hey everybody, it's Jeff Roberts here from Qualified. Thanks for joining us for this webinar. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes here. But in the meantime, if you can all jump into chat and just let us know, introduce yourself, let us know what company you're from and ultimately what you're hoping to get out of the webinar today. And we'll make sure we address any questions that you have that are submitted through chat. We're going to get this show on the road. Thank you all for being here. As I mentioned, my name's Jeff Roberts. We want to make today's session as interactive as we possibly can. We're definitely going to spend some time introducing project code challenges, which are sort of the next big thing from our team here at Qualified. But ultimately, we want this to be a discussion about identifying software engineering talent, how you can hire better software engineers. And this session today is only going to be successful if we're able to help each of you. So please jump into the chat on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to introduce yourselves. And if you have questions for us, please send those out via chat, and we'll make sure we pick those up and discuss them as we go along. So as I said, here today to help all of you hire better software engineers, and we want to start by introducing sort of the next big thing from our team. We're calling it Project Code Challenges, and that's where we're going to start today. So who you're going to be hearing from, myself, my name's Jeff Roberts. I'm the head of growth at Qualified, and also here as a presenter is Jake Hoffner, who is the co-founder and CTO of Qualified. So you have access to our team today. We want to give you feedback on your hiring process, while also showing you our new Project Code Challenges functionality. So why are we all here? At the end of the day, as I said, to introduce this new feature set, but ultimately each of you is attending this webinar because you're trying to hire software engineers. And as we know, the sort of war for talent out there is very fierce, and ultimately you not only need to identify software engineers, but ultimately identify engineers that are going to have the skills needed to be successful once hired at your company. So that's kind of what we're thinking about day in and day out at Qualified, and ultimately how we want to help you. The other thing I would encourage you to do is, as we go through the presentation and we talk through some of these new product features that we're going to be introducing, think to yourself, okay, how does this apply to my business? How can I take this and leverage it within my own hiring process? And certainly if you have questions about how to best do that, please, again, shout those out in chat. But that's kind of the context we want you to be thinking through. How does this stuff that we're showing you apply to your business? So to start, let's back up a little bit. Some of you on this call are already Qualified customers, so this is going to be very familiar to each of you. But for those that are not, just a little background on our product. At the end of the day, we make a developer assessment platform that lets you send job candidates coding skills assessments. Candidates take these assessments and it indicates to you that they have some level of proficiency in writing code and are sort of worthy of continuing on in your hiring process or continuing further down your hiring funnel. And today, basically, we have within the product the notion of coding challenges and assessments. So when we say those things, what are we talking about? Today, a challenge is basically an individual coding task, and then an assessment is a series of those challenges that is given to candidates for any particular role. So for example, at the bottom of the screen, the image that you're looking at is a pre-screening assessment for a full stack developer, and it consists of several different challenges that candidates are then asked to complete as part of that assessment. So what's project code challenges? This thing we keep talking about, what does it mean? At the end of the day, what we're most excited about is this really moves the value of qualified well beyond being just used for a pre-screen at the beginning of a hiring process. So typically, a lot of companies start out using qualified. They put all applicants through a relatively short pre-screening type of assessment. But this new functionality is really designed to move qualified's value well beyond the pre-screen and help you at later stages of your hiring funnel. A couple things that are particularly important about this format, and we'll unpack each of these as we go along. The first is we now support the use of multiple files when you're completing an assessment. So previously, the single file format that's been popular with Qualified and other coding assessment platforms, there are some benefits to it, right? It makes it easy for developers to complete an assessment and choose whatever language they'd like to complete the assessment in. It's easy to administer, and it's very helpful in just figuring out, hey, can this person write code? But the multi-file support really opens up a wide array of other ways that you can get insight into candidates beyond the single file format. So we'll circle back to that. The second sort of important part of project code challenges is the hiring company can control the files that candidates can see and edit as they work through any assessment. And then finally, candidates, as they're writing code, will actually see the front end of the program that they're building visually evolve as they're writing their code. So it's a great way to assess front end development skills in particular. So what are the key use cases? Chances are, if you registered for this webinar, you were responding to sort of one of these three use cases as we sort of got the message out about today's session. So the ones that we want to talk about are, first and foremost, hiring mid to senior level engineers. Pre-screens oftentimes are a great way when you're hiring junior engineers, just to sort of take a first cut at your hiring funnel. But with those senior engineers, sometimes who have resistance to the idea of needing to take a coding assessment, how can you use an assessment to identify skills that you'd expect a more senior engineer to have that maybe a junior engineer wouldn't? That's one of the big uses of this new feature set. The second would be hiring front-end developers. So as I mentioned, just being able to get that feedback and visually watch your application evolve as you write code is a major piece of valuable functionality if you're assessing a front-end dev. But also there are just languages like Java or C# that are really difficult to assess in a single file format. So the multi-file support that we mentioned previously is really valuable if you're looking to assess coding skills in those languages. So for those of you who haven't seen Qualified before, just wanted to briefly share this screenshot that kind of gives you an overview of what our testing or assessment screen and UI kind of looks like. So at a high level, a couple things I want to call out here. The first is in the top left-hand corner, you'll see this is where we allow you to support multiple files. You can rename those files, edit those files, etc., just as you would if you were actually designing a program in the real world. And I think ultimately everything we do at Qualified, we try to come back to that use case of what does development look like in the context of your company in the real world, and how can we replicate that for the assessment process when you're hiring or educating engineers at your company. Below that, you'll see we have the real-time web previews. So again, as you're working through your assessment, actually writing code, you'll see the front end of your application visually evolve here. The entire IDE or development environment that you see here is highly customizable, so you can tailor it to just fit your working style and really mimic your own development environment to the greatest extent possible. That's really important because it just lets developers complete assessments in an environment where they have the best opportunity to put their best foot forward and really showcase what they can do, rather than putting them in an unfamiliar environment that's not conducive to them doing their best work. A couple other notable mentions on the right-hand side of the screen here. With any qualified assessment, including project code challenges, you can set a time limit for your candidates. So that's a really nice way, first and foremost, to make sure that you're not asking people throughout your hiring process to invest too much time into any given assessment. You can say, here's an assessment, we're gonna let you work on it for 20 minutes or an hour, whatever it might be, and sort of hold them to that time. That's also valuable just in looking at candidates relative to one another. So knowing that they all had the same amount of time to complete an assessment, how much work did each actually accomplish in that time period? And then just two other things, you can add detailed instructions here. This is really important for the multi-file format that we're talking about. So aside from just giving instructions on writing a particular piece of code or building a particular piece of functionality, the multi-file support really opens up use cases here, and you can provide much more detailed instructions on things like the requirements gathering process or how you want a candidate to communicate the work that they've done after they've completed the assessment, things like that. And last but not least, all of our results are validated using real unit tests rather than a more generic standard in or standard out code validation format. So with that background, the question becomes, okay, this sounds great. We understand you have this assessment platform. There's multi-file support, all these things. How does this actually apply to my company? How can I best leverage this? This is the sort of central idea that we want you to walk away from the presentation today with. And it's from a psychometric standpoint, really the most effective way to assess a software engineer or anybody for that matter, and sort of their readiness to actually do the work once hired at your company, is to collect a work sample of some sort. So project code challenges really allows you to expand the scope of the work sample that you're capturing in a pretty significant way. So going back to the single file coding challenges that we've offered for so long, they're very helpful in assessing, can this person write code? Can this person write code in whatever language it might be, whatever language you're trying to assess? But if you're hiring a senior or more senior engineer, there's going to be a whole bunch of other skills you would expect that person to possess that they've earned through their time as a software developer. And that's really where the multi-file support helps out and helps expand the scope of that work sample. So how does a developer understand requirements or gather requirements for any given program that they're asked to design? These are sort of soft skills that you would expect and want to be able to assess, frankly, in a mid to senior level engineer, but you can't do it so well in a single file format. So we now, by allowing multiple files, really open up that sort of pre-work assessment, if you will, and your ability to assess an engineer above and beyond just their ability to write code. Likewise, on the other end, after an engineer has been pitched a project, they've gathered their requirements, they've started to write their code. What do they do thereafter? What do they do when they're finished writing that code? Again, what we're trying to do here is replicate real-world experience. So how does that engineer go about communicating what it is that they built to other engineers? How do they talk about the bug that they just squashed and notify their team? How do they actually go about making a push request, and what does that entire process look like? These are things that you can now build into the project and build into your assessment. And candidates can be asked to submit files that maybe it's just an email that explains to the team in a hypothetical sense what the bug they just squashed was all about, or why they squashed it, or how they squashed it. So we're giving you the ability to really assess these soft skills that you'd expect to see in the real world, that you'd want to assess, but that can't typically be assessed in a single file format. And last but not least, why is this important? Multiple files sounds great. We get it. You're expanding sort of the scope of the work sample that you're able to capture. But really, this is important for two reasons. As that work sample becomes more and more similar to the real world work that you'd be asking a developer to complete, you're going to make better hires. If that work sample directly mimics the actual work you're asking this person to complete, you're going to make a better hire. So that's at the end of the day what we're driving towards. Also, it's just about saving time and money. So in addition to this testing format, in addition to all of the assessments that Qualified offers, we do have a full suite of review tools, which allow you to leave manual reviews on little sections of code. You can watch code playback. So you could ask your candidate to complete any of your assessments and then just go back and watch, the actual process of their program evolve and look at the code that they wrote over a 5 or 10 minute period. You can use pair programming sessions to talk to the candidate about the work that they already completed when you sent them the assessment. And doing these sorts of things, taking your engineers time to watch code playback for 10 minutes is going to dramatically save them time, and I would argue give them better insight too, rather than just bringing somebody into your office and interviewing them for an hour on site. So it's just about speed of review, ability to get those deeper level insights beyond just their ability to write code. And if you're able to do that, you can greatly accelerate your hiring process and save your engineers time, which is so valuable. So that's what we wanted to cover. Didn't want to get too far into the weeds in terms of looking at the product itself, although we're happy to do that if anyone wants to go there. At this point, I think we've introduced the concept, whether you're a qualified customer or not. And we want to turn things around to all of you and talk about how we can help you design a better hiring process. So I'm going to comb through the comments here really quickly and see if we can pick up some questions.
Yeah, it looks like Hank has a question. He's asking, he's hiring a mid to senior level React developer. So how could you use the platform to do that? So Hank, I'll jump in real quick and answer that. So the platform allows you to do full React web development. You have a web preview that allows you to do a full project. You could maybe have a challenge that's focused on a specific component, or it could be a full size app. And as you develop that application, it uses hot reload so that you can actually see the edits to the files in real time, and you can see that you can kind of see that unfold. I'll actually do a very quick demo showing off the challenge. Let me hope this works. So here, actually, I have a view one pulled up, but it's same concept. Here, I'm actually looking at a challenge that one of my colleagues recently completed, and here you can quickly see a little overview of the different files that are involved with this challenge. So let's actually pull up the details. And right from the start, it pulls up the timeline, so we'll be able to see playback. We can see the full file tree and all the files over here, and we can see the last state of the test run output when he submitted his solution. We can also pull up a web preview, and I'm actually gonna drag it down here so we can see these side by side. And right here, you can see the final state of his code, so you can actually play with the application that he built. move this around, see how that functions. You can test it, and then we can go back and actually do the playback. And so we'll go back and actually watch his solution unfold. And you'll notice in the web preview that it's actually updating the app in real time based off of this code. And then we can speed this up and kind of just watch his general thought process. You don't want to necessarily sit here and watch everything in meticulous detail, but it's just nice to quickly get a general sense about how he approached the solution, and ultimately seeing what the final solution that he came up with and how he arrived there. And I'm happy to answer a more specific question in terms of development, but that's the general idea, is that you can now focus on deeper React or Vue or Angular 8 software development. In addition to that, when it comes to mid to senior level developers, other things that you can do when we're designing a challenge is you can do things like, for example, you give them requirements, the instructions are here, but there can be additional objectives. So there's some functionality that's meant to be implemented, but you could also design the challenge, for example, to be more in the context of a bug fix. So the code's already there, it just needs to be corrected. Or maybe you have code that is not written very well, it's maybe older, it needs to be updated, and you can more so ask the developer how they would go about refactoring the solution, and actually ask them to provide some details about how they would do that. And you can simply you could set up the solution, for example, so that you could have a file that says email, and that file represents the email response that candidate would have sent to the team with their recommendation on how they would go about solving things. So it's not just about them coding and passing tests and proving that they can code. That's a big part of it, but it's also about making giving them the opportunity to discuss the work that comes before the coding and also after the coding, and tying all that together into a full-size work sample that gives you much more detail beyond just the actual coding itself.
Awesome. So I asked Hank what he's doing today to assess senior level React developers. He says he's doing a manual process using email and a zip file, and asked, are there pre-built React tests available in this format so that my team doesn't have to start from scratch?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've been working hard to write. We have, I believe, somewhere between 12, maybe 15 fully built out challenges now. They range from very small tasks, just to kind of make sure that it's more of a pre-screen size, just make sure that they actually know what they're doing in React on a basic level, that they can program, all the way to writing a full-size application. Now, we also tend to focus. The idea isn't to have someone sit there and spend 5 hours writing an application. That's just probably too much time you're asking from your candidates in the hiring process. So what we tend to focus on is not actually writing a full application from start to finish, but more so diving into different contexts or stages along the way. So, for example, you might be asked to write a very small component from scratch, and that could be one challenge. And maybe that challenge is designed to take maybe 30 minutes, no longer than 45 minutes on average. And then another challenge that follows up is them actually diving into a different part of the code base, and it's actually a project that's already provided. So you're not writing code from scratch. You're having to parse through and understand, maybe 10, 12 different files, and just understanding a small change that needs to be made. So what you're testing there isn't their ability to write code. It's more so their ability to understand other people's code and to be able to adapt their style to fit that and to be able to extend functionality, which is much more likely that's what you're expecting them to do when you hire them, as opposed to them just writing software from scratch. So our goal is to not have someone spend 5 hours doing something, because it's a lot of time and a lot of stress, and that's just not a very ideal hiring process either for you or for the candidate. But to have them dive into different parts and understand how they handle different situations and how well they can handle those situations.
Julian asks, can you preload data from somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have it's basically a full working project. You have web access. You can pull API or data from another API, or you can just have like a JSON or a YAML or a CSV file stored in the project itself, and you can pull in the data that way. The key thing about understanding about our architecture is that every time that you run the tests, it's a fresh slate. Similar, I don't know if people are familiar with Codewars with our existing classic code challenge format, it's the same way. Every time you run tests, it's a fresh instance. So there is that startup time of having to pull the data in, but it's certainly possible. And part of the reason why we do that is to ensure that there's always a fresh, exact, clean slate whenever tests run, as opposed to there be some potential state or side effects left over if you're working with a pre-existing or like a persistent container where you were running tests on the same image over and over again. So it's that clean slate. You pull the data in every single time. There's a lot of different options available for you to be able to work with that data.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Julian. Anybody else? Any other questions we can answer? Any thoughts on how this can best be applied at your company, or comments on what you're doing to hire today? All right, I think that's it then. If there's no more questions, we'll let everybody go. But certainly we'd love to continue the conversation, and software or not, if there's an opportunity for us to help you with your hiring process, feel free to reach out. You can sign up for a free trial of Qualified and play around with project code challenges yourself at qualified.io, or you can email us anytime at team@qualified.io as well. We're always happy to chat, but thanks for attending today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.